Welcome to another episode of the Federal Newswire Lunch Hour Podcast with your host, Andrew Langer.
Well, hey there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Federal Newswire's Lunch Hour special series on the REINS Act, REINS Act in Focus. I'm Andrew Langer, your host. Joining us today, I'm very excited to bring her on board. Her name is Twila Brase. She is the founder and president of Citizens Council for Health Freedom. She's a registered nurse. I had the pleasure of hearing her speak at Freedom Fest just a couple of weeks ago, in which she talked about the REINS Act. And I said, my goodness, I have to have her on this podcast special series. Twila, we're going to get back into what CCHF is, but talk about why you brought up the REINS Act within the context of America's healthcare policy debates.
Well, the REINS Act, it would just put Congress back in charge of what happens in healthcare rather than the regulators.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't understand, how much control the regulators have over what happens in any policy. But for sure in healthcare, if you want to get solutions, if you want to get back to affordability and patient-centeredness and confidentiality and everything that a patient actually wants in the exam room, and I'm speaking as a nurse, but I'm also speaking as a patient and an American.
Right.
If you want to get back to that, you have to stop the regulators. And you have to, I guess the thing is, for those who may or may not know as much about regulations, but the fact of the matter is, the bills are passed and they're signed, and then they've got all of this power that the regulators use to create new law that is nowhere in those laws.
Right.
And they're called rules and regulations. And, just look at Obamacare, for example. So after the Obamacare decision with John Roberts, in the Supreme Court, I went over to, McConnell's office, and I said, I want to see that stack of regulations. Now, some of you may not remember that, but they had this stack and they had a bow around it, right?
Oh, yeah.
And it was very, very tall. And so I finally convinced them to bring it out, and I stood next to it. And I raised my hand as far as I could, and it was still taller than me with my hand raised high. And this is all something that's not in a law. It's just put in place by the regulators, and then that's what controls what happens in healthcare.
And it allows the opportunity, right? It turns it on its head. We have this Congressional Review Act. If you want to, challenge something, you can have it submitted to Congress, and Congress can go. But this turns it on its head. This really puts the emphasis on these agencies to make something that is sensible. Because if it costs a lot of money, if it's a major rule costing $100 million a year or more, and certainly stuff having to do with sweeping changes to American healthcare policy is going to have that, it puts the burden on Congress to actually take a look at it and say, see if X squares with Y. Talk about that.
Congress, when it says it takes an act of Congress to get something to pass, what they're really talking about is almost impossible for Congress to act together in any way, shape, or form. And so when you've got regulations coming out by the boatloads, every day, well, what's Congress going to do? They're just going to let this whole process continue on unabated unless something really rises to the level that the public is outraged, and then they'll take a look at it. And so, I would just say that what really perturbs me often is when they bring to a committee the head of some agency. So let's just say the head of HHS, right? And then they are essentially begging the secretary of HHS to do something about something, right? And I'm like, so this is not what you have the authority to do. And the problem is that Congress put these regulators in charge. And as you know, back in FDR's time, the Supreme Court said, no, you cannot delegate your legislative authority to an agency. You can't build these agencies. It's not within the constitutional framework. And of course, FDR promised to pack the court, and one of the justices, backed down. And now we have, I think it's almost 500 agencies in this country writing laws all of them unelected bureaucrats. All of them get pensions after almost all of them get pensions
Right.
after they're done, right? They get access to the federal employee health benefits program, and they're all writing laws that we're all beholden to that are called rules and regulations. So the REINS Act, would rein this in.
Yes, literally.
Right? It would rein it in and say that Congress has to approve regulations before they can go into effect. And if I had my druthers, I would say that they all get to go on pause until Congress says yes. And if they really want to put all those regulations into effect, okay, well, fine. But now they are accountable. Now they cannot not point to some regulator and say, well, the secretary did that.
Right.
The secretary did this, right? It really would bring accountability back to Congress, and they wouldn't be able to say, no, I didn't vote for that.
Twila, what I appreciate about the work that you guys do at CCHF is that you're a nonpartisan organization, and you're dealing with real world issues. And one of the cases that I've been trying to make is this is important regardless on which side of the aisle you sit on. For folks who are Democrats or never Trumpers who are concerned about healthcare and the impact of the I should say the perverse disincentives that a massive regulatory state causes for healthcare innovation, talk about how this impacts them and how the REINS Act is something they ought to be supporting.
Well, everybody should want the person making decisions to be accountable to them or to the public, right? And so whatever side you're on, I mean, look at a rule sometimes. See, that's what the public doesn't even understand.
Right.
They don't know what a rule looks like. But, there can be 1,000-page or a 1,500-page or even a 900 or 500-page rule. But that rule is 3 columns. It's probably, I don't know, 9 or 10-point font.
Oh, yeah, tiny font.
It's tiny font, right? And all of those words you are beholden to. And I remember that a once former bureaucrat told me, and as an attorney, he said, the secretary said, do this regulation, right? And then all these people and all of these cubicles, he said probably 50 cubicles were writing this rule. Then it all came to him and a few other attorneys to look at.
Right.
And they had to look at every word because all you'd have to do is put one little sentence in there that everybody would disagree with or would impact your business, but just be one sentence. And did they see it? Did they actually notice it? Hard to say. So much can be snuck into there from all those cubicles, and then you have to abide by it or be fined.
Right.
And it doesn't matter what party you're on. It doesn't matter.
And it also stands in the way of innovation, right? And we all know that, obviously we've got a shortage of doctors. You and I have talked about this, and a shortage of other healthcare providers out there. That's X. Some of this can be solved via innovation, right? Mm-hmm. And if you have regulations that discourage that innovation or stand in the way of innovation or stand in the way of new products coming to the market, right? We all recognize there's got to be some level of regulation, right? That's the whole nature of this. But let's talk about the issue of innovation in terms of solving the problems that we have in 2025 in America in healthcare.
Well, I think there's a lot of things you could look at with regulation, but perhaps for your listeners, looking at what happens with drugs is interesting, right? So it takes, according to the people that I've talked with, $2.6 billion and about 10 years to get just one drug approved by the FDA. And that really means that you have to be a big company, right, or you have to be a little company that innovates, and then the big company buys you up, and still then you've got, 10 more years to get that thing across when you could help so many people in those 10 years. And so there's a lot of time, there's a lot of time and there's a lot of money that's unnecessary and that's wasted. And could be other ways to do this besides having a huge regulatory structure to go through. It really disincents anybody who can't afford the cost but has the idea, right? And they're like, right, well, I have an idea, but I'm not going to be able to get that over the transom, and so I'm not even going to begin. Let me go do something else. So the expense and the time that the bureaucracy creates means that we don't get to see products that we could, and then the products that we do see are more expensive than they should be.
And it's more expensive, and there's greater incentive to prevent them from becoming generics down the road. All of these things conspire together. Twila, how do folks find out more about the good work you guys are doing at the Citizens Council for Health Freedom?
Well, I'll just say that our mission is to protect patient and doctor freedom.
Yes.
And we do a lot with privacy. So come find us at cchfreedom.org, cchfreedom.org.
Go check them out, cchfreedom.org. Twila Brase, thank you so very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
This has been yet another episode in the Federal Newswire Lunch Hour's special series on the REINS Act, the REINS Act in Focus. I'm your host, Andrew Langer. Enjoy the rest of your lunch.